February 1st, 1943. Skies over the Tunisian coastline. A lone, grievously wounded B-17F Flying Fortress, bleeding altitude and hydraulic fluid, struggles to stay in the air. Its mission to bomb the Axis-held docks at Bizerte is a memory. Now the only mission is survival. For the 9 young American airmen inside, physics, logic, and every rule of aviation screamed that they were already dead. Their aircraft had just suffered a catastrophic, unthinkable injury. This is a story of All-American, the bomber that landed with no tail, and how 9 men defied the laws of physics.
To understand the impossibility of what transpired, we must first meet the men and the machine. The aircraft was B-17F 5BO, serial number 41-24406, assigned to the 414th Bomb Squadron, 97th Bomb Group, 12th Air Force. Her crew on that fateful day was led by a 24-year-old pilot from Seattle, Washington, Lieutenant Kendrick R. Bragg, Jr. His co-pilot was Lieutenant Harry C. Newsell. These were not rookies. They were veterans of the brutal early air war over Europe, having flown missions from England before the group transferred to North Africa to support the Allied push following Operation Torch.
Their fortress, nicknamed All-American, was more than just a plane. It was a 10-man community, a complex system of engines, guns, and human courage. Weighing over 30 tons fully loaded, its 4 Wright Cyclone engines were meant to carry it through flak and fighters. Its design was robust, but it had limits. Every pilot, every engineer knew one fundamental, unbreakable truth. An aircraft's tail section, the empennage, is not an accessory. It is the very source of stability and control. The horizontal stabilizers and elevators control pitch, nose up, nose down. The vertical stabilizer and rudder control yaw, the left and right movement of the nose. Without it, an aircraft becomes an aerodynamic brick, tumbling uncontrollably until it disintegrates.
The strategic situation in early 1943 was a tense stalemate. Following the Allied landings in North Africa, Axis forces under Rommel were fighting a desperate delaying action, funneling crucial supplies through the port of Bizerte in Tunisia. The 97th Bomb Group's mission was to sever that lifeline. On the morning of February 1st, All-American joined a formation of 24 B-17s on a high-altitude bombing run. The sky was clear, the enemy waiting. The stage was set for a collision that would defy belief. The mission proceeded with the grim routine of a daylight raid. As the formation crossed the coastline near Bizerte at 21,000 feet, the black puffs of flak began to dot the sky. Inaccurate at first, then tightening. The bombers held their course, the bomb bay doors yawning open.
Below, the docks and warehouses shrank into the crosshairs of the Norden bomb site. For the men in the cramped, oxygen-masked confines of their aircraft, the world narrowed to the roar of engines, the chill of -40-degree air seeping through the fuselage, and the imminent release of their payload. Bombs away. The aircraft lurched upward, relieved of its deadly weight. The formation turned for home, but the danger was far from over. German anti-aircraft gunners had found the range, and now the hunters of the Luftwaffe arrived. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s of Jagdgeschwader 53, seasoned pilots who knew the vulnerable underbelly of a B-17 formation, began their slashing attacks. Top turret gunners and waist gunners opened up, their 50-caliber Brownings creating a lattice of tracer fire. Ball turret gunners spun their glass and steel spheres, searching for the gray shapes flashing past at 400 miles per hour. The formation tightened, each fortress relying on the combined firepower of its neighbors.
All American held its position, her gunners reporting hits, her pilots jinking slightly to throw off aiming fighters.
Then, at approximately 11:20 hours, the crisis began. A pair of BF-109s making a high-speed pass from the front quarter, the hardest angle to defend, targeted the lead elements of the formation. One was hit by defensive fire and began to trail smoke, but the wounded German pilot, perhaps in his final defiant act, did not bail out. Instead, he made a conscious or a fatefully unconscious decision. His crippled fighter, a several-ton projectile of metal, fuel, and cannon shells, became a missile. Lieutenant Bragg, in the cockpit of All-American, saw it too late. The smoking Messerschmitt, out of control, did not collide head-on. It did not strike an engine. In a one-in-a-million trajectory, it rose slightly, then sliced across the top of the B-17's fuselage just behind the radio room.
The sound was not an explosion, but a horrific, grinding, screeching tear of metal. The entire aircraft shuddered as if struck by a giant's axe. In the cockpit, the control yokes jerked violently. For a heart-stopping second, there was silence on the intercom. Then the reports flooded in, voices tight with panic and confusion. From the top turret, directly behind the cockpit, "We've been hit! Something big!" From the radio room, just behind the impact zone, "There's a hole! I can see sky!" But the most chilling report came from the tail gunner, 19-year-old Sergeant Samuel R. Ray Robinson. Isolated in the rear of the plane, his world had just come apart. "Tail to pilot, the fuselage it's severed behind me. I'm looking at the rest of the plane. I'm in the tail section and it's separated." What Sergeant Robinson described was the geometrically impossible. The BF-109 had cut a swath through the rear fuselage, leaving the tail gunner's compartment with Robinson still inside, attached to the main aircraft by what appeared to be a single, shredded strip of lower fuselage skin and the control cables that ran through it. The horizontal stabilizers, the vertical fin, the rudder, they were all still there, but they were dangling precariously, connected to the main B-17 by a thin, twisting spine of metal. All-American was, for all intents and purposes, a bomber without a functional tail.
In that moment, Lieutenant Bragg and his crew faced a stark, almost laughable choice: bail out over enemy territory and face capture, or attempt the impossible. Bailing out meant leaving Ray Robinson to certain death in the detached tail. The decision was instantaneous. They would not abandon their man. They would try to fly. But could it fly? Bragg and Newsel gingerly tested the controls. The elevators responded, but with a sickening, wobbly lag. The rudder was nearly useless. The aircraft wanted to porpoise, to pitch up and down violently and then yaw to the left. It was like trying to steer a speeding freight train on a wet, icy track using only a length of string. The structural integrity of the entire rear end was suspect. Any sudden movement, any increase in turbulence could cause the remaining connection to snap, sending Robinson and the entire tail section spinning away.
And then there was the wind. A 250-mile-per-hour slipstream was now roaring through the gigantic gash in the fuselage. The temperature, already sub-zero, plunged further. Loose equipment, maps, and flak jacket liners were sucked out into the void. The crew in the radio room and waist positions were exposed to the screaming open air, held in only by their oxygen lines and interphone cords. They had to navigate a 2-foot-wide catwalk over a literal abyss, with nothing between them and the North African landscape 20,000 feet below but a jagged hole.
Worst of all was the sound. The deafening, unending roar of the wind tearing at the wound in their aircraft. It drowned out engine noise, made intercom communication a shouted nightmare, and pounded on the nerves of every man aboard. It was the sound of their vulnerability, a constant reminder that their aircraft was broken in a way no aircraft was meant to survive. Sergeant Robinson and his isolated, oscillating plexiglass cage at the very end of that tenuous connection faced a unique terror. With every slight adjustment from the pilots, his world would sway and shudder. He could see the entire length of the wounded bomber ahead of him and the empty sky where its solid box should have been. He was both a part of the crew and utterly alone, a man in a dangling lifeboat, praying the single rope would hold.
The formation, seeing their crippled comrade, did not leave them. Other B-17s tightened around All-American, offering morale support and, hopefully, some slight reduction in turbulence from their prop wash. But they could do nothing about the physics. For over an hour, Bragg and Noosley fought a continuous, exhausting battle with the control yokes. It was not flying. It was a form of aerial persuasion, a gentle, constant coaxing of a dying machine. They traded control back and forth as muscles cramped from the strain. One minor mistake, a gust of wind, an overcorrection, would be the end. They began a slow, agonizing descent. Landing at their forward base was out of the question. It required a precision they could not muster. Their only hope was the large, sprawling Allied airfield at Bone on the Algerian coast. It had the long, forgiving runways they would desperately need, if they could make it another 90 minutes.
The turning point was not a single heroic act, but a series of them, a symphony of cold courage and technical ingenuity performed by 9 men in 3 separate sections of a disintegrating aircraft. In the cockpit, Bragg and Noosley developed a technique. They discovered that by using massive, almost counterintuitive amounts of trim tab on the remaining elevator surfaces, they could partially counteract the aircraft's desire to pitch nose down. Power became their primary tool for altitude control. To go up, they gently increased power on all 4 engines. To go down, they decreased it. The throttles became as important as the yoke. It was a delicate, nerve-wracking dance of engine management and minute control inputs.
In the shattered fuselage, the crew became structural engineers. Understanding that the twisting motion was their greatest enemy, they made a critical decision. They moved carefully, one at a time, to redistribute the aircraft's weight. They gathered in the radio room and forward sections, shifting the center of gravity forward to reduce the leverage on that fragile connection point in the rear. Every step they took was measured, fearful of inducing a fatal oscillation.
And in the ball turret, directly beneath the impact zone, the gunner performed an act of surreal bravery. The ball turret was retracted for flight, but its mechanisms were damaged. Knowing that the dangling landing gear created drag and instability, but unable to use the crippled hydraulic system, the ball turret gunner manually cranked the gears for over 30 minutes to painstakingly raise the landing gear into the wells, streamlining the battered aircraft as much as possible. Communication was key. With the wind roar making the intercom nearly useless, a chain of survival was established. Messages were passed by hand signal, by note, by tapping on shoulders. The engineer monitored engine temperatures and fuel levels with hawk-like intensity, knowing a failing engine would mean the loss of the fine power balance keeping them aloft. The navigator, peering through the Astrodome, called out course corrections guiding their wobbly path toward Bone.
For Sergeant Robinson, in the tail, there was nothing to do but endure. He became the crew's eyes in the back, reporting on the condition of the swaying tail section. Every groan of metal, every fresh crack in the thin metal ligament was relayed forward. His calm reports from the epicenter of the crisis were a bedrock of stability for the entire crew. Finally, the blue of the Mediterranean gave way to the brown coastline of Algeria. Bone Airfield appeared in the distance. But the final test, the landing, loomed.
A normal landing procedure was impossible. No flaps, no steep approach, no go-around. They had one attempt. Bragg and Noosley lined up from miles out, establishing a shallow, flat glide path. They would essentially have to fly the plane onto the ground. Touching the brakes too hard could cause the tail to collapse. A bounce could be catastrophic. The entire airfield had been alerted. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway, their crews watching in disbelief as the tailless fortress made its final approach.
With a skill that bordered on the supernatural, Lieutenant Bragg held the crippled B-17 level. He cut power, and the massive aircraft, almost sighing in relief, settled onto the tarmac of bone. It rolled for what seemed like an eternity before finally coming to a stop. Silence, for the first time in 90 minutes, enveloped the crew. Then, elation.
They had done it. All 9 men, including Sergeant Robinson, who scrambled forward from his isolated perch, emerged alive. Not a single serious injury. The ground crews who swarmed the aircraft simply stared, unable to comprehend how it was in one piece. The damage was even more shocking up close. The tail section was attached by less than a square foot of shattered metal and the control cables. The horizontal stabilizer had a 3-foot gash from the Messerschmitt's wing. It was, as one engineer later stated, an aerodynamic impossibility. The legacy of All-American is one of pure human tenacity triumphing over physical law. The aircraft itself was deemed too damaged for combat repair. It was salvaged for parts, its story becoming legend within the 8th and 12th Air Forces. The crew, after debriefing, returned to combat on other aircraft. They had proven that the limits of machinery could be extended by the will of the men inside it. While no specific medals were awarded for this single flight, the military often recognized sustained combat, not isolated miracles. The crew's actions represented the highest ideals of airmanship and loyalty. They refused to leave a man behind, and in doing so, they rewrote the manual on what a B-17 and its crew could endure. The story was corroborated by gun camera footage from other bombers in the formation and the stunned reports of the ground crew at Bone. It stands not as a myth, but as a documented, peer-reviewed testament to courage under the most extreme duress.
The flight of All-American was a fleeting moment in the vast aerial war, a single incredible data point in the curve of survival. But it captures the essence of the bomber crew's experience, a fusion of human skill, mechanical endurance, and sheer, unyielding grit against impossible odds. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII